Okay, so if I mess up, you will help me out. Welcome, Mount Vernon, to the Wednesday, October 2nd, Charter Review Commission meeting. It is 6:10 p.m. We have one item on the agenda. We have a guest speaker, Mr. Chuck Strom, who will introduce himself when we get started. And right now, we're just going to do roll call. David Rogers.
Here.
David. Kareem Bell. Raquel Bennett. Brian Dwyer.
Here.
Anitra Hadley. Mary Kingsley. Eileen Lambert. Here. Rosa Blackwell Lawrence. Here. Dolores Lopes. Kevin Morrison. Here. Haley Pilgrim. Monica Whitings Hogan, present. I said it right? Hogan, Whiting Hogans. Marnike Williams. Ita Morris. With the advisory board members, please go around and say your names.
I'll start. Mike Justino.
Stephen Bastos.
Gabriel Thompson.
Axel Bowman.
Erin McGarry.
Susan Lally.
Okay. And any other guests, please let us know your presence.
Danielle Brown.
Brian Johnson, Corporation Counsel.
Okay. So as I said, there is just one agenda item, and it is to hear from and speak to our guest, Chuck Strom. I'm gonna let him introduce himself. And I sent you the questions and broad topics that we wanted to cover. I leave it up to you. Do you want to just talk to us and then we can ask questions, or would you rather do like a question?
Do 5 minutes and then you can ask questions. Some of those, because I've been having
Okay,
a technology issue.
okay.
So my name is Chuck Strom. I was the city manager over in New Rochelle for 22 years, from 2002, 2022. And before that, I was deputy city manager. All in all, I was in New Rochelle for 30 some years. I didn't think I'd ever work again, but right now I'm just took on the interim role in the village of Mamaroneck. Just was supposed to be a couple of months, but things never seem to work out that way. So hopefully I'll be done with that by the end of the year. So I guess what I'll do is just explain what the council manager form of government is and how it differs from what I believe you have here. And then I'll take whatever questions that you might want to have. So the New Rochelle, by the way, is the largest city in New York State with that form of government. Anything larger than New Rochelle has what you folks have, which is called, I guess, the strong mayor form of government, mayor council form of government. In the council manager form of government, the mayor has, it depends on how the charter is written. New Rochelle had a very strong council manager charter. The mayor had no executive authority at all. Mayor is a member of the city council. If you really want to describe the position, it's more akin to being the president of the city council. Mayor chaired the meetings of the council and was the head of the council. I guess the purpose behind that is that in the council manager people's mind is that the legislators legislate and they leave the day-to-day operations of the government to professionals. So New Rochelle, they hire a city manager. Most city managers have a lot of experience if they get to a city like New Rochelle, a master's degree in public administration. And the one major difference that I see in the two forms of government is that the power of the city council is much greater in a council manager form of government than it is in a strong mayor form of government. So in the council manager form of government, in New Rochelle, this is a good example. Strongman, they have 7 mayor and 6 council members elected by district. They select the city manager. And every other employee of the city either directly or indirectly works for the city manager. They do not work for any of the elected officials, except for the assistant to the mayor, who's the person who keeps the mayor's office running. Used to appoint the city clerk, but for whatever reason, they transferred that by their choice to the city manager a few years ago. And then the city manager runs the day-to-day operations, selects all the commissioners based on experience and their abilities to do the job. There are, I have to say, one of the benefits, at least I felt in the 30 years I was in New Rochelle, no elected official ever asked me to hire anybody. So everybody was appointed, for the most part, I would say, based on their professional background and their skills. The council managed form of government is an attempt, I believe, to make government more kind of like a business, where the city council would be the board of directors who hires a CEO, who then runs the day-to-day operations. Managers serve at the pleasure of the city council. So can have a 5-year contract, but really doesn't matter because they all say you serve at the pleasure of the city council. If they decide, 4 of them in New Rochelle's case, not that many there are here, that you're gone, and you get whatever your severance package is in your contract. So that's really the way it works. There are all different various levels of it. There's also the council administrator form of government, where the administrator has a lot of executive authority, but not total executive authority. That's more common in towns and villages, where the mayor and the town or village board appoints positions like the police commissioner and the clerk treasurer, but everybody else is appointed by the city manager. It's an odd thing in those villages because the elected officials appoint the police chief, but the police chief is responsible to the village manager, which kind of makes no sense because why would you be worried about somebody that doesn't appoint you? So, and in White Plains, they have kind of a hybrid. I really don't know what to call it. The mayor has some executive authority, appoints some commissioners, but is also a member of the city council. So in the pure form of council manager government, there's a separation between the legislative side, which is the city council, mayor being a part of the city council, and the executive side, which is appointed and run by a quote unquote professional who then hires professionals. It works if the elected officials buy into it and appoint a competent professional manager. Doesn't work in the case for many years. Yonkers had a council manager form of government, and they just hired political supporters as the city manager. They'd last 6 months and they'd get fired. So the real stated goal of it is to keep the politics out of the day-to-day operations of the city, and that the people who work for the city are based on their merit and their ability to do the job, not on based on whether you supported a particular candidate or not. I think that the main difference is that and I don't know a lot about Mount Vernon's operation, but in a lot of strong mayor forms of government, the top level of commissioners are appointed by the mayor. And when the mayor goes out, they go, and new people, and I guess your deputy commissioner level, it's probably the professionals who stay through administrations. I don't know if that happens here or not, but in many cities, that's the case. So in my experience, the only politically appointed position in that city for 30 years was the city clerk, and then they gave that up. The manager now appoints a professional city clerk. And what I can say is that I was there. Now, it didn't happen too often. It's an odd anomaly. I was in my 30 years in New Rochelle, there were 3 mayors, one for 8 months, and one for 16 years, and one for 14 years. But what does not happen in the council manager form of government, in my experience, is that when the mayor either is voted out or retires and transitions out, the commissioners don't go with that person they stay because they have the professional experience to do, if they do the job as the manager and the council dictate. So essentially, the council is the policymaking body of the city. The manager is responsible for implementing the policies that the city council adopts and hiring staff. So that is how the form of government works. I would say I was kind of lucky. There were a lot of elected officials in New Rochelle who did not support, that they preferred a strong mayor, but they had 2 charter referendums, which has to go to a vote. And the people of New Rochelle, anyway, chose to keep the council manager form of government. And I never really did experience interference in the operations. They may not have supported it, but they at least respected the way it is. And to that end, the government ran fairly well, I like to think. So that's how it works. I don't have experience. I'm sure you all know much more about how your government works than I do, but I suspect that as mayors come and go, so do commissioners. And, you know, one of the arguments is that people against the council manager is that people want to elect the person that is their mayor or their chief executive. The mayor is here. And I do understand that. But it's really not an accountability thing, because in the manager situation, if the mayor comes in, and I'm not saying any of that's happened here, but if a mayor comes in and is not a good mayor, you got to wait 4 years before you can elect a new mayor. If the manager stinks, you can fire him in a day, him or her in a day, which actually happened. Person who took my place in New Rochelle lasted 14 months, and that was it. They decided to make a change for whatever reason. They don't have to provide a reason. It just can't be, you know, it could be for cause or it could be out clause, but it can't be.
Can't be illegal.
That can't, it'd be pretty hard to do it illegally. So, you know, you serve at the pleasure of those people. So, that's the way it works. So I'm happy to take any questions and
So-
about my experience.
Hang on. I just want to take a step back because I realized that I did not do something because we've had a lot of these information sessions and we've given people the option of whether or not to stream because we want people to feel comfortable talking to us. So I realized I did not say, as a charter commission, what we are doing is taking a look at the charter and seeing whether or not there are, you know, things that need updating or things that need changing. And we're looking at anything we think might help the city operate more efficiently, you know, or better. We have spoken to various city people to find out what they think about the charter, whether or not there are things in the charter that can change to help them do their jobs better or help the next person in that role do their jobs better. And so one of the things we are looking at and thus collecting information about is the form of government. And it's in that vein that we requested to speak to someone with a lot of experience in one of the areas that we're considering, that's the city manager. So that's why we are having this discussion. So I just wanted to make sure I said that.
Can I add just 2 things?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you really do want to know what it's all about, there's an organization called the International City Managers Association, or ICMA. They have a website and they have a whole section that describes how the form of government works. I'll make a bold prediction. I highly doubt you're going to change the form of government to a council manager form of government here, but I will say if Mount Vernon is still having, because when I came last time, the one thing I did say that I really think you should do is change the elected controller's position. I don't know, is that still an elected position? I think the chief fiscal officer of any municipality should work for whoever the chief executive is. Takes away that tension that seems to have happened quite a bit here, where the controller and the mayor have been at odds. I don't think it's happening now from what I've read, but that's one of the things that I really think ought to be done. CFO should be appointed by whoever the CEO is. Just in my opinion.
So I know you had a hand up. I don't know whose hand was up first, but I'm going to go to you, Michael, since you're here.
Right.
So I have two questions. One is, you spoke about serving at the pleasure. Did your contract state that your contract would have to be paid out if you were let go? Or you would just have a specific severance package based on your time in the job?
I never put a term on my contract. I thought it was kind of useless since I served at their pleasure. So if I have 3 years and they want to get rid of me in 6 months, they could do it anyway. So the severance package typically is a 6 months of your salary and health insurance, and that's it. So if you are terminated, now what happened in New Rochelle last time, I don't know, because I was out of it. Severance package was larger. There was a lot of back and forth, and I don't know what happened. So, but throughout my career, the protection that I had was 6 months salary and benefit. That was it. So, and it really didn't matter if a new mayor came in and decided for whatever reason, perfectly legitimate reason, and he or she could get 3 other people to agree, they could make a change. And that's pretty standard. That's a pretty standard severance package for a manager. So they don't, even if it was a 5-year contract, at least in my case, I never had a term, but my experience is that it doesn't get paid out. Sometimes it does, but I don't believe it should.
I guess they could all be written differently, right?
Well, you'll have 2 things here. You'll have the charter if you do that, and then the operating document between the city and the manager is the contract. And it should say what it says, which is what mine said, 6 months, and that was it.
So are you saying that it was in the charter as to?
No, it's in the
It
charter.
wasn't. It's just in the
The
contract.
charter says
was
that the
good.
manager shall serve at the pleasure of the mayor and city council. Also says that I said that in my particular contract.
And my other question was, you made a comment, and I don't know if you can answer this, and whether it's strictly, obviously it's an opinion. I think you said that you didn't think that a change of structure in Mount Vernon would happen. So I'm just curious as to why you say that.
And it has nothing to do with Mount Vernon. It has to do with strong mayor forms of government. You're going to have to somehow get the mayor, whoever it is, and happen to like your current mayor, but the mayor has to give up all that authority. And in my experience, they don't want to give up all that authority. There is, and this is not a criticism because it happens everywhere, but that there is just by nature a lot more political patronage in a strong mayor form of government than there is in a council manager form of government, at least where I was.
We don't disagree that it would not be easy.
All right, David and then Eileen. David?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Strong, you mentioned that under the council manager structure, you basically get your instructions from the city council in terms of the legislature and how they want you to dictate certain things. Did you find that with the change in legislators, your mandates changed, or did you basically run the day-to-day operations consistently regardless of who was in council?
It was pretty consistent regardless of who was in council. New Rochelle is kind of unique because the council didn't change all that often either. There are no term limits in New Rochelle. So I have had council people that were there for 16 years, 20 years. And I should clarify one thing. It's not just implementing the policy. The manager often makes policy recommendations to the city council. They can choose to accept them or not. But most of the agenda items that were put on the city council agenda came out of the staff as recommendations. For instance, obviously the biggest policy document a city has is its budget. Under the council manager, the manager prepares the budget, presents it to the city council. They can change it however they want. But essentially, in my experience, there were not a lot of changes in the budget as presented by the manager. And then my professional philosophy was, this is what I think should be done. But you folks are the elected officials. If you think otherwise, it's my job to implement whatever policy you vote on. So the answer to your question is a little of both, but my experience was it was stable on what I was expected to do when I was over there.
And just to follow up on that, do you think it was stable because of the long terms of the people you worked with? And do you think it would have been an entirely different experience if you had new council members every, let's say, 4 or 5 years?
Well, I like to think it was that way because I was doing a good job, but putting that aside, I think part of it was the long-term stability of the people who were on the council. But I mean, if 20 years is a long time, and there were probably 20 different members of city council that I worked with, maybe only 3 mayors, but there were an awful lot of city council members because remember, when I started, they had 4 at-large council people, then they changed it to districts. So there's 6 districts. The city is broken up into 6 supposedly equal sized districts. So there was a lot of changes among the city council, but there were some long-term people too.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Eileen?
What's the criteria for hiring? So you would assume that it's, not you per se, but just even in this position, the city council, do they have a criteria for hiring?
So,
It's appointed. Right?
Yes, it's an appointed position. They can set the criteria, but the professional standard for most cases is a master's degree in public administration or an equivalent, like an MBA, something like that. Could be, and in a city type environment, I think and this is really up to, could be put in the charter if you wanted to. It could say, and in fact, it does say something in the New Rochelle Charter. I don't remember what it was. I think it's like 6 months of acting as a manager in a community. I didn't have that, but I was the acting manager in New Rochelle several times, so that kind of counted. So I would think you'd want experience as a city manager in some other community because cities are just bigger. And, in New York, the great majority of manager governments are villages and towns. We have, I think, 6 cities in Westchester. So we have Yonkers is the biggest. They had a manager, went to a mayor. New Rochelle's the second largest. You guys are bigger than White Plains, am I right? Population wise? Yeah, sure. But you guys have a mayor. White Plains has a hybrid. Peekskill has a city manager, and Rye, which not really a city, but they have a city manager. It's a smaller community.
Do you feel like, and you might have covered this already, do you feel like you have autonomy to make decisions, or does everything you have to do have to be voted on by the city council?
No. In New Rochelle, I made day-to-day decisions that if there was a state of emergency, the city manager called the state of emergency. If we were going to suspend garbage collection because of a snowstorm, the city manager, now I would consult with the elected officials to make sure they were on the same page. That was just my style. Some managers may just go off and do it on their own. So the policy setting is broad policy, really. The day-to-day grunt work, I mean, let's face it, in local government, we're keeping people safe, we're putting out fires, we're picking up the garbage, providing parks and open space for people. Those are the core functions. And it's the manager's job to make sure those major departments, all departments, but the major ones are operating at an efficient level. So there was very little day-to-day, I don't want to say interference, but discussion more with the mayor than members of council. The mayors that I worked with, even though they were quote unquote not full-time, were there all day. So anyway, there was not a lot of day-to-day stuff, but that's because I believe there was an open line of communication between myself and the elected officials I worked with. I would, talk to them at all times. And the interesting thing is, I had at the end, New Rochelle, like Westchester, has become a very democratic city when it comes to political affiliation. The one Republican on the city council that was left in New Rochelle for my last 8 years, I had to work with him just as much as I worked with the Democrats. That's the theory behind who you work for. You don't, because you're in the minority, you don't get shut down. have your streets plowed last and your garbage picked up last. That shouldn't happen in any form of government, but it kind of does. So, no, my experience was that I, as the manager, ran the day-to-day operations and made those decisions.
Excellent.
You mentioned Yonkers where the city manager model didn't work that well because they used it as a political football from what I know. Knowing what worked well in your show, what didn't work well in Yonkers, do you have any advice in terms of safeguards that could, for example, be put in the charter to try to prevent a bad outcome? I don't know if you do, but I was just wondering if you have.
I think you could put professional experience requirements for the job of city manager in the charter. That doesn't mean that somebody hired. It's a hard question to answer because some people are just political and other people are not political. Elected officials are obviously political. I had to operate, and I enjoyed operating under as I mentioned, that organization, the ICMA. They have a code of ethics. And basically, one of the tenets of the code of ethics is that the manager cannot participate in any political activity at all. So I never, thankfully, had to go to any political dinner in 30 years. A lot of dinners, but no fundraisers for elected officials. In fact, that would have been a violation of my code of ethics if I had attended such a thing. So there are measures you can put in play, but I have to tell you, unless the elected officials are going to buy into the concept, it's not going to work. So it has to be something that your elected officials want. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Or at least they'll respect it. I would imagine if you were to change your form of government here, you'd have to go to a referendum and the people would have to decide. So you would hope that they would, support what the people have decided. That happened. Listen, both of the long-term mayors that I worked with both put up strong mayor referendums while I was there.
That's my question.
Yeah. It's the city council that has to, but in New Rochelle, I think there are two ways that it can be done. And usually the right way is to do a charter revision commission, have a charter revision commission come back to the city council and have them vote. And then you have a general referendum. I think it can also be done under state law. You might know more about this than I do. If the certain number of signatures of those that voted in the last election sign a petition and submit it to the city clerk, then you're compelled to have a referendum. Once I was the deputy manager, the first time they did it, both times I was the deputy manager, I never faced a referendum while I was the city manager. And, it wasn't, and in both cases, it wasn't about the manager. Well, the first case it was. Really. Like I say, it's like any other, and like anything else, there are good mayors and bad mayors. There are good managers. I will not sit here and tell you there are not bad city managers. There are. And there was a very polarizing city manager who was the city manager in New Rochelle for a long time. Actually beat his record, but he was there for 17 years and was very much involved in the politics. So it wasn't operating well. But they had the referendum then. The second time they had the referendum, it had nothing to do with the current manager. They just wanted to see if the public wanted to switch to a strong mayor form of government. And it was rather resoundingly defeated, but, that could change again. I wouldn't be surprised if someday in the near future, they don't have another referendum. The manager has to not take that personally unless it's directed at the manager. But I used to say in New Rochelle, you have to have two things to have a successful referendum. One of two things. One is either a very popular mayor or a very unpopular city manager. So I took pride in the fact that, I respected the fact that the mayor was the chief elected official, was the face of the city. And it wasn't my job to go out and, I liked it that a lot of people, they did know who I was, but they, I didn't have to have my face on a placard or anything like that. I consider it a job of a professional. That's not the downgrade politicians, but elected officials are elected officials. And you can have one of the weaknesses I believe in the strong mayor is you know, anybody could be elected mayor. There are no qualifications other than residency, as far as I know, in any particular city. So I think you have a better, and then I'm biased, I admit it, I'm biased. I think you have a better chance of more professionally run government with a manager in charge rather than a mayor.
Do you have any familiarity with the chief administrative officer form?
I do, but not a lot. A lot of my colleagues were city administrators or town administrators. And it really depends on the community. The ones that I'm most familiar with are the town of Mamaroneck, not the village where I'm working now, but the town of Mamaroneck has an administrator and an elected supervisor. Supervisor in a town is the equivalent of a mayor. And, you know, the supervisor had some executive authority, but also sat on the board. So I think in most cases of the administrator form, the mayor has some executive authority. They are oftentimes also members of the city council and have a vote on the city council. It's just less power in the manager's hand.
David?
Yes. So I wanted to ask more about down level responsibilities and day-to-day operations. So as the city manager, how did you go about evaluating whether it was the commissioners or employees within the city? And were you given leeway to, hire, fire, et cetera?
Yeah.
And what was it based on?
Okay, so just as I served at the pleasure of the city council, I appointed all the commissioners in the city of New Rochelle. You got a fire commissioner, police commissioner, public works commissioner, probably all those same ones you have here. They served at my pleasure. The way I did it was we implemented a formal annual employee evaluation. And every commissioner, in fact, every non-union person was evaluated every year with basic categories. So I did all the commissioners evaluated their deputies and that down the line. And I didn't like having to fire people. But there were a few occasions during the 20 years where I had to make a move or something wasn't working. But I was responsible for hiring those folks. And they were based on the job specifications that were written for each position. So there was the commissioner of police would have to have certain specifications, qualifications. Commissioner of finance would have to have an MBA or an accountant's degree. Public works person doesn't necessarily have to have a college degree. Somebody that's worked in public works their whole life might be a better choice than somebody who has not. So there was flexibility in the hiring, but I hired them all. And on the few occasions where somebody, in my mind, needed to be terminated, that was done. The city council was never part of the decision making, although they were informed every step along the way so that they were knowledgeable. But and I was fortunate. I never had any interference in any of those decisions during my tenure, except at the end when the mayor wanted to be the development commissioner, and that was a big problem.
Okay. So just to follow up, so your very first year when you were hired, I presume there were commissioners in place. How did you handle that transition?
It was a little different for me. I was the deputy manager before I was hired as manager. So I had to go through that as the deputy manager. They hired a new city manager while I was the deputy. And if he decided he wanted to bring somebody in as the deputy, that was his choice. When I was the manager, when I was hired as the manager, I knew all of the commissioners. So I never had to sit there and say, well, I don't know, you're good or you're not good. But if I had to do that, I want to think that I would give the person, a year, 6 months to a year, and then make an evaluation as to what I thought they were doing the job properly. So it's a little different for me as the deputy. Before becoming the manager, I already knew all the commissioners and had worked with them for several years.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of hiring the commissioners, how did you get the pool of people? Like, was it put up on the website or was it, was it on like an employment agency or, where did you get the list of people that you were going to hear and what was the interview process like?
So the way I handled it was we would advertise in when there was a local paper.
Right.
Now it's the websites. So if I'm hiring a public works commissioner, I will always put it in the ICMA newsletter because a lot of people who aren't city managers join ICMA because they might want to become. But there's an American Public Works Association, there's a New York State Public Works Association, there's a Westchester County Public Works Association. And that's the same for parks, that's the same for finance, the Government Finance Officers Association. So all of these commissioner type positions have professional organizations that they're members of. My current, one of my current retirement jobs is I'm the executive director of the New York State City County Managers Association. It's a part-time little thing, but all the managers in the state belong and they network. So they all have websites. They all have job opportunity portions on their website. So we would advertise it. My preference was then to form a committee of my current commissioners to be the first committee to review the resumes, narrow it down to 5, interview them, and then I would come in towards the end after they recommended to probably it was 3 to 5 people. So it's not a hard thing to get a job announcement out, especially in the era we're in now of social media. But the best way to do it is to go to the professional organizations affiliated with the job position.
I have 2 questions. So we spoke to the city administrative officer, chief administrative officer.
He spoke to others.
Others in another municipality. And they spoke about the fact that they, the same organization and the ethics code, and they not involved in anything political, but there was a chief of staff that the mayor had. Does the New Rochelle have a position in the budget for a chief of staff?
So you're not supposed to say that, and I know who you talk to, because I know who's the chief of staff in Westchester City. I had a chief of staff at one point in lieu of a deputy city manager. The mayor does not have a chief of staff. In my view, in the council manager form of government, the manager is the chief of staff. The manager is the CEO of the organization. There would be no need for the mayor to have a chief of staff because the mayor has no staff. The city manager has all the staff. They work for the city manager. So it could either be called a chief of staff, it could be called a deputy city manager, it could be called any number of things. But that I am aware in some cities, one that I know of, that there is a chief of staff or a chief administrative officer is appointed by the mayor, I believe. So that's a difference. In my opinion, it gets a little murky when you have those kind of not direct lines. And again, I'm speaking from a biased point of view. The New Rochelle Charter was very strong in that this is what the elected officials did. This is what the appointed officials did. The manager was the appointed person who took care of the organization. So that's the difference.
And my second question, a little different. You had mentioned, I don't know whether you worked under public systems where there was at-large council and wards or districts. What can you tell us about how those differ or benefits or detriments to either one of those forms?
I did work under both, but only as a manager, as the city manager, the districts had been put in place. The benefits to districts, you get a more diverse representative city council. When it's everybody at large, it's not always going to be a representative display of the community that you elect. And I think that was pretty much proven in New Rochelle. It became a much more diverse city council with African-American and Hispanic-American representation on the city council. Most of the at-large members were not. But that was a long time ago. That was in the 90s. We switched in 1992. The negative is that sometimes if you're elected in a district, you just focus on your district and you don't focus on the city as a whole. So it's a balancing act for the elected official. If you're only elected by 1/5 of the city, then, you got to figure I'm going to be judged by 1/5 of the city and I'm going to be judged by what gets done in my section of the city. And sometimes it's hard to get elected officials by district to think more broadly about the entire city. So something that might be good in one district and maybe not so good in another district, you have to get them to come to a consensus on it.
And the mayor was at large though, right?
The mayor is the only at-large
So
elected official.
that person would normally be in charge of kind of keeping that broad view.
My belief in what the role of the mayor should be in a council manager form of government is to try to maintain consensus on the city council and get them working as a body rather than 6 different or 5, whatever the number is, individuals representing a district. And it did work there. Some people liked it, some people didn't. They had a rather aggressive downtown development program there. A lot of big buildings have gone up. Good for some districts, not so good for other districts, but it was a unanimous decision that that's the way they could get people to invest in the city. So they adopted the policy and then we implemented the policy. But I think that's if it's a council manager form of government, that's the most important role. Two roles for the mayor, the face of the city, going out and promoting the city, and secondly, maintaining order and consensus on the city council at their meetings and in their deliberations.
So is the mayor leads the city council, like, so they have oversight basically to like break a tie, break a vote?
Well, they don't.
Or you said on there, right?
Yeah. They are the chair of the council meetings. So the mayor would always vote last. So yes, they'd break a tie if there was a tie. 99% of the votes that were taken in New Rochelle and probably in most places on routine things are unanimous. If it's controversial, the mayor, for whatever reason, they called the mayor's name last in the roll call. And he or she was always a he when I was there, but now it's a she. She would be the tie-breaking vote. But they chaired the council meetings, they ran the council meetings, and, just the rules, Robert's Rules of Order. They were the person who ran the meeting. The city manager took part, and I took part in every city council meeting as an active participant, but I had no vote.
So you say the mayor is the face of the city, so people could bring stuff to the mayor. They're doing all the political shaking hands, kissing babies, but the mayor would still have to bring things back to you to make the decision. So in theory, the mayor's getting all of the energy of the city.
Yep.
But doesn't have the power to do anything with the energy that they're getting. They have to.
That is an argument that I've heard a lot, and it's true. Some people want the mayor to be the person making those decisions, and that's all a matter of choice. But yes, when I'll say 2 things about, I can say complaints. Mayors get complaints about everything. The mayor would take the complaint, he gives it to me. I'm assuming the mayor of Mount Vernon takes a complaint, gives it to somebody to fix. They can't fix it themselves. They don't have the time. And I used to say I viewed my job as when something went well, I was to stand in the back and let the mayor and the elected officials take credit. When something went bad, I had to stand up front and take the blame. My wife didn't like that too much, but and the answer to that is they're responsible to the whole city. I'm only responsible, I have to keep 4 people satisfied. They have to keep the entire electorate satisfied, or at least the majority of it. So it's a tricky thing, but the mayor, you're just not going to change I can tell you, if you took a poll in New Rochelle, whether it was me, whether it was anybody else, everybody thought the mayor ran the city. They had no idea that there was a city manager because the city manager stays in the background. Some people knew it, but a lot of people did not. So it's a tough thing to try to educate people on.
The reason I'm asking the question, going back to your other point, and like, where you're saying like you don't think it would necessarily shift here because it's getting the elected body to buy into that concept. And I could see the thing coming up is their power being removed, having to be the face. So just understanding where does their power lie in someone wanting to be the face of, knowing that technically the power is not with them. So just trying to see how do we position it in such a way that it gets the elected officials even being comfortable with moving in this direction. Because I can see where it's tricky.
You raise a good point because it's hard for a mayor to, stand up if something goes wrong and say, well, that's the city manager's fault. Well, nobody wants to hear that. They didn't vote for the city manager, they voted for the mayor.
Right.
But I don't want to, I will say this, there's only one person whose power is diminished if you change the form of government. That's the mayor.
Right.
The city council's power is greatly enhanced because they choose the city manager and they vote on everything. So, they're really, I don't know the charter here, but I imagine the mayor has a significant executive authority. It's more limited in the manager's form of government. City councils are much more powerful in a council managed form of government than they are in a strong mayor form of government.
Your point in response, I just want to clarify, the point being in response to they elect the mayor, not the city manager, that they also elect the city council? Is that why you're pointing that out?
No, it's just that the city council has as much voting authority as the mayor does. The mayor is one vote of 7. So they're equals as far as implementing policy in the council managed form of government.
But the city council has more power because they appoint the city manager.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about the political end of this or how this could be politicized, when you're trying to change over into this form, the things to think about is how that can be politicized because the city council gets this increased power. Right, but shares equal in some regard in voice, but actually has oversight because the city manager, of course, serves at the pleasure of the city council.
I work for all of them, not just one. And when I say, I don't think, the reason I say what I say about the likelihood of a switch, it seems to be much easier to switch away from a council manager form of government to a strong mayor form of government because elected officials are the ones who are, and it's a hard word to use, but I want to just gaining by the switch in the form of government. In order to switch, you'd have to take a mayor in any community and the mayor basically say, I think this other form of government's better. I'll give up all my power and I can't appoint anybody. So it's just a harder sell when it's going the other way. When there are referendums, it's usually to get rid of the city manager form of government. But that's my reason for skepticism, only because, certain systems are entrenched in certain cities and they're hard to change.
Rosa, hold on, hang on, Rosa. You're deferring.
Hi, sorry, I was a little bit late.
It's okay.
I really came spoke to the other charter commission. And the one thing that stood out is related to this last conversation we were having with Colleen around that switch and how difficult it is to kind of make that switch from strong mayor to this city form of government. And I remember you said at that point, you thought it was like a 5-year, like a 5-year month to be able to convince people that it's the right thing to do, to sway the public, educate the public, and then actually get it implemented. And, have a referendum on it, voting on it successfully. So my question is, do you still feel that way? And then also, given that the Charter Commission's window of service is 2 years at most, we have, I think, about 1 year left. What would you say, like, if we said we think that at least this should be explored further, what kind of advice would you give in terms of next steps, like what we could do to make sure that it continues to be explored, and if we can put it on the ballot this time?
So, I've never been involved actively in the Charter Revision Commission, but I would think the most important thing is education of the public. And if you're allowed to, I don't know what when you were formed, what the rules and regulations were. But I would say you could have a town hall meetings, people can come and have speakers who will explain what the strong mayor form of government is, explain what the council manager form of government is, let people ask questions. Because if you just spring something on people and they don't have any idea what it is, it's not really a good referendum. So you say you have a year left. So, maybe your recommendation is to, if you want to consider this, to hold a bunch of forums and town halls where people can get educated on it. And I don't know here, because the first time they tried to change it in New Rochelle, they had a charter revision commission. Second time they did not. So the city council, I think, it's different because the city council, mayor's on the city council. Maybe the corporation council knows. Could the city council just pass a resolution to have a referendum? Or that would have to be, I don't know how that would have to be done. So what would be the steps? It'd have to be through a charter revision commission.
My understanding.
They'd have to recommend it and the council would have to adopt it.
Or a group of residents that they together.
Right.
How many people vote in?
It's general election or whatever it is. My recommendation would be that if this group feels that the city should seriously consider a change in the basic nature of the government, the form of government, that you recommend that between now and the formation of another charter revision commission, that there be some educational attempts to educate the public on it. You might, but within a year, when I said 5 years, it's because you have to get charter revision commission to recommend it, then you have to get the city council to debate it and have public hearings on it, and then you have to have a referendum, which you could either have during a general election or you could have a special election. So, I would think if there's a year to go, and this is something the community is serious about and this group is serious about, you could have several educational sessions where you can just have a town hall meeting open to everybody. You have presenters presenting the two forms of government or a hybrid, the administrator form, however you want to do it. And you just educate the public and you can gauge the public's reaction to it. And if people are like, that sounds terrible, we don't want that, then you don't recommend it. If they say, well, it sounds like a good idea, you could consider it. I don't necessarily think in another year you couldn't educate the public. When I said 5 years last time, if I remember correctly, I'm getting a little old, I meant the process from beginning to end, going through a recommendation, city council discussion, public hearings, all the stuff that has to go
Well,
with it.
in this instance, the charter commission could put it on the ballot. It doesn't have to go to the city council.
That's interesting.
Theoretically, so, but we would have to have it on the ballot at August. Then
This August,
this
this next
No,
coming
not
August?
this fall.
It's August. It's September.
Coming on, it's the year.
Oh, next.
Yeah,
Right.
this August.
This, oh, right, this, I don't think it's August 2025.
But you have a year, essentially you have a year.
Right.
You'd have to vote, this group would have to vote to put it on a ballot before your terms expire, I suspect.
You have to put it on the ballot. You have to submit it for August, and then it would go on to the November ballot.
2025.
Yeah.
To vote on.
I think you have enough time to educate people and I don't see how a charter revision commission can vote something that dramatic without actually going out and hearing from the people and finding out what they really want. Much as I think the council manager form of government is great, I know that when they had a charter revision commission in New Rochelle, they had several public sessions where people came and they had, not people from the community. They had people from other communities talk about council manager, talk about strong mayor. There's plenty of time to educate. The process after that's very fast, put it on the ballot, but it was fast. Listen, it was very fast when they did it in New Rochelle too. I for it to be, in my opinion, as much as I prefer one form of government because I made my livelihood at it, I think that the only way you can do it is if you're comfortable that the people of the community know what you're proposing, have some kind of idea what they're voting on. Otherwise, but special elections are often held off election cycle for the very purpose of having people not vote. You don't want to do that. You want to have people be knowledgeable. So if this is going to be if you do this, that's the most significant charter change you can make. And if this group feels they want to explore it, you should start having educational sessions. If you don't think it's realistic and you don't, and then maybe look at some other sections of the charter. I go back to, I say, if your controller's still elected, I say that person should be appointed, not elected. I think that would be a very good thing for you to do. Anyway.
So I think Axel had his hand.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I was just wondering in terms of, how does the day-to-day operation of the budgeting system work, without, the way I see it here is like, obviously you have the budget projection for the next year, but then we have the Board of Estimate and Contracts here that consists, I think, of the controller, mayor, and who is the third, city council president, who basically vote on every item over a certain amount. How does it work day-to-day operation if you're the city manager? Do they hand you the budget and you just administer it throughout the year, or what are the mechanisms on that?
So I would develop and propose the budget. Council would then deliberate, make changes to the budget, and they adopt the final budget. I would then have the authority to implement the budget as prescribed. If there were anything that had to be done outside of the budget, like a budget amendment or additional spending or something unusual, I'd have to go back to the city council and get the vote to do that. And how I kept them informed was they would get a quarterly budget report 4 times a year from me on here's where we are, this is what we spent. You know, if you have a winter, I waited 32 years for a winter where I could put my feet up and not have to worry about streets got plowed, and it hasn't snowed since I retired, which is. But if you have 10 snowstorms in a winter, listen, I wasn't going to ask the city council to bust the overtime budget for the snow plowing. We just did it because your priority is to clean the streets. But afterwards, I'd have to go back and say, this is why, this is what we need to do. We have to offset that by maybe we delay a capital project. We not do something that we were going to do. So yes, I had full authority to implement it, but any deviations from the budget had to go back to the city council for their approval. And it only works if you keep them informed. They need to know what's going on.
But if you basically said within the budget proposal, we will need 2 fire engines, that was it, you would just buy those 2 fire engines and you wouldn't have to go back to the.
There was always a capital budget that they passed within the operating budget, and ours was a 10-year capital budget. But the only year that counted was the first year. It's just a planning document, but if I was able to convince them, or the fire commissioner was able to convince them that we needed a fire truck, then they voted that in the budget adoption phase. I would not go back in the middle of the year and say, we got to buy a fire truck unless something extraordinary happens. One blew up or just got damaged in some emergency. Then you have to, listen, fire trucks are $1 million and it takes 40 years to get them, but still it's those kind of things. You have an operating budget and a capital budget, and they should be, in my opinion, voted on at the same time. And the capital budget should be a planning document that lets them know that, well, this year we got to buy a fire truck, and next year we have to buy, I won't say police cars because they run 24/7. You got to buy some every year, but we need another sanitation vehicle because it's got to keep the fleet up to date. So that's how it worked. If it was a deviation from the budget, I had to go back to the council.
Gabriel,
Yeah. Just had a couple of questions. Well, first of all, it's a compliment joining the budget. I've spent a lot of time with it. It's very professional, amazing document.
I wish I could take credit. I had a finance commissioner. The finance commissioner was very good. I wrote the message. They didn't post it.
Like the third page is like, we get awards for this budget.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how key in your opinion was your role or having one of the things I think that we explore is like the professionalizing the day-to-day operation of government, trying to take the heat out and take some of the politics out of it. Right? And that's why having a city manager, chief administrative officer is recommended for smaller cities, 50 to 200,000 people, 150,000. Because it's just too small to have so much politics in picking up garbage. And how integral do you think your form of government was in the efficient delivery and professional delivery of services in the government and the day-to-day operations? And I would ask, what role did it play in the recent 2014 and post development in New Rochelle, and that the reimagining of a lot of New Rochelle that's going on?
The second question, I'll answer rather quickly. The city council, various city councils have said to me, we need to develop the downtown, bring money, financial investment into the city, and figure out a way to do it. So I hired a development commissioner, and I said to that person, you got to do two things. You have to, if we want development, we have to develop by what the market will dictate. You can say you want retail all you want. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not coming. So what do they have in some buildings in New Rochelle? They have vacant retail space because no retailers are coming. And the second thing, I say this with respect, I said, you got to keep the elected officials out of the selection of developers for projects because they'll never get done. So we created an overlay zone for the downtown, and it was sort of in circles. The mid downtown was the highest density, and as you went out, the density went down. I give them credit. They voted it unanimously. And then when development projects came to the city that met the zoning requirements, they went right to the planning board. They didn't have to go through the city council meetings where people stood up and screamed and yelled. The council would get cold feet and they'd say no. So, and that's a natural reaction. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying this is what. And that's what happened. And if you want development, and if you talk to developers, they will say that was the best thing New Rochelle did. Now, I don't take credit for it because the development commissioner figured out a way to do it. He put the overlay zoning in. I didn't know anything about overlay zones, but he did put it in place. We picked a master developer who did the secret, the environmental analysis, cost millions and millions of dollars. And that was the environmental analysis for all the projects. And in exchange for that, they had access to 5 city-owned properties that they could build on if they wanted. They've only done 2. So that was how we came to that decision. So we were very much a part of that. We took what the city council said they wanted to get done, and we put a proposal in front of them that they approved of. And I always say it was a very brave decision by that group because they essentially extricated themselves from the decision-making process on certain projects in the downtown. Some people liked it more than others, but you can't argue the fact that there's been a lot of building going on in New Rochelle. So it's the city has changed. I forgot the first question.
Well, just, thank you, by the way. I asked that because we are in the middle of doing a comprehensive plan for the city. I asked just how you felt that your position in your form of government, the professionalization of day-to-day operations and delivery, how that affected the professional and efficient delivery of services and the operations in City Hall.
Well, I think it was important that the people that work for the city, the people that do the actual day-to-day work, knew that they didn't have to worry about getting entrenched in some kind of political stuff. That was my job, was to keep the people that work for the city insulated from the elected officials and the politics of it. Every city, small or large, has politics. Sometimes the smaller you are, the more politics you have. So, but there's no reason that political battles should go past the manager. The department heads and the people who are actually doing the work that needs to get done should know and have a comfort level that they just go out and do their jobs and people will leave them alone as long as they do it well. And they'll get their paycheck and the city's service will be delivered. That's what I think is the major benefit. I think if you ask people that work in the New Rochelle government, they would say we never had to worry about any politics. The manager did, and some of the commissioners probably did, but the people that were actually out there doing the work, no worries about it.
We're close to that time, and I want to respect your time. Michael has the last question, and then we have one last one.
Want to follow up on the board of estimate that we have here, the budgeting process. So anytime the city council approves, let's say, a contract for an outside vendor or whatever, all those things would go before the Board of Estimate for approval. That's not happening. So let's say the city needs to hire a law firm to represent something and they're not in contract. That was not something that those people.
I go back to the council.
So
So even if it's budgeted, let's say it was budgeted for, I don't know, purchase of 2 sanitation trucks. We went out we had a purchasing protocol, we went out, we did our bids. We took the bids and we went back to the city council authorizing the bid or accepting the low bid. Or in some cases, you don't accept the low bid because there's something else. So no, the city council, in fact, acted as your board of estimate and control or whatever it is. I didn't just take the budget and run and spend like a crazy person. I had to go back, little stuff I had the authority to do, but anything major, we went back to the council and reconfirmed what they approved in the budget.
thank you.
All right, last question, because we do want to respect your time. You know, if we decided, obviously after talking to the public, that we were going to offer this, do you have an opinion on things that, here are 1 or 2 things that should absolutely be written in? Here are 1 or 2 things that you should avoid based on your experience.
Well, avoid broad language and confusion. And I would say if you're going to create the position of city manager, to specifically define in the charter what the roles and responsibilities of that person are and what the qualifications should be. So I would outline that. It's my recommendation, city of this size, that a person who wants to be a city manager, if the position existed, should have a master's degree in public administration or the equivalent, and should have 2 to 5 years of experience managing another municipality. That would be the most, that would be the things that I would say, put in the charter. No gray area. If you don't, then it doesn't really mean anything, because Yonkers didn't, and they hired politicians to be city manager. And, there was a book written about the Yonkers housing from the 70s or 80s, I can't remember. It's called It Takes a Hero, I think. And they made a movie out of it on HBO, and I watched it. And the funniest thing I saw, it was actually, you should watch it. It's very well done. The last scene is the city manager congratulating the mayor and working with him to change the form of government to a strong mayor form of government. I thought that was ironic.
That it takes a hero.
It takes a hero.
Show me.
Show me a hero. Show me. It was an HBO, I think.
It was.
Interestingly enough, the author, her mother was worked with my father. So it was fascinating. I met her, and it's really good. If you really want to learn about how some politics works and how in those days people were segregated, you should watch it.
All right. Show me a hero. On that note, please join me in thanking Chuck for coming here and spending the time and talking.
My pleasure. I wish you luck. It's not an easy job.
Thank you.
All right. So can we get a semi-commitment out of if we do go
Will
public?
you come back and talk
Public
to us?
education, would you come and speak?
Sure.
All right,
Happy to.
very good.
I get you a few people that would be very good if you go on.
That would be amazing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Get home to see the second inning. Hopefully.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you very much.
All right, that being the only thing on the agenda, we move motion to adjourn. I'm gonna speak up. Second, all right. Oh, we have to vote? Yes, we're live. Where's your, right? No, all in favor?
Aye. I can't vote.